Hi, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review, and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today we have a discussion on fantasy and sci-fi books, and today's video is all about the books I read before BookTube. So I'm going to go through chronologically from January of 2023 and all the way up to August, which is when I started my BookTube channel. Now, I'm doing this primarily to give you guys a bit of a foundation and an understanding of what I like and what I've enjoyed reading this year, so that when my book of the year stuff comes out, if I pick something that I read in January, then you're not like, oh, but he didn't even talk about this. And also, I think this is just a great way to talk about a load of books that I've loved reading this year, because I've had a pretty fantastic reading year. I'm not going to, I don't have any like stats or anything like that. But I will be going through book by book, and I don't know whether I'm going to talk about how long it took me to read them, because some books took me forever to read, even though they're very short, and that's mildly embarrassing. However, I also was not. I was not reading as like obsessively before I started my BookTube channel, so I was probably spending about as much time reading as I was watching BookTube. Whereas now, most of my watching BookTube time has been replaced by making BookTube. So yeah, let's just start straight away with the first book that I finished in 2023, which is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this is the first book in his Bloodsworn saga. This has a absolutely fantastic cover, which is what sold me on the book. And I remember walking into my local library, and the fantasy selection in my local library, which is very small out in the countryside in Somerset here, is quite poor. But they had the hardcovers for Shadow of the Gods and Hunger of the Gods, the second book in the series. And I thought to myself, well, there's literally both here, and there's never like a whole series of books in this library. So I'm going to pick it up. And I did, and it was the first book I read in 2023. Now, Shadow of the Gods, I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5. The reason it got a 4 out of 5 from me was because I felt like the start was a little too slow. So often you'll find this, and I talk about this in like every fantasy review, that the first 30% of a lot of fantasy series initial books is quite slow and includes a lot of world building. But John Gwynne spends the first 30% of Shadow of the Gods also doing a lot of character building as well as world building. So while it pays off and it is worth it, I do wonder whether the book would have been more enjoyable overall if it had had a little bit of a faster pace and a bit more, maybe had been a slight teensy bit shorter. Book 2 I finished that year was Artificial Condition by Martha Wells, which is the second book, I believe, in the Murderbot Diaries. Now, at this time, so I rated Artificial Condition 4 out of 5. This is still the point in time with Murderbot where nobody had pointed out to me that all the books had the same story. So basically every Murderbot book, what happens is Murderbot will turn up at a new location. The new location will have some interesting foibles. So Murderbot will meet kind of another artificial life form like themselves. There will be some dangerous expedition for them to go on, and at some point something bad will happen to either the humans that are around them or the artificial intelligence. So once someone pointed that out, I found it much harder to enjoy Murderbot books because I was starting to find them very predictable. I don't want to... also, I read a lot of them quite close together, which made it more obvious as I was going on. The thing that I would say is, right, number one, Murderbot books are really expensive for how short they are. So I got all of my Murderbot books from the library, every single one, but they're genuinely like £18 for like a 150 page novella. And while they are called I think that the publisher might refer to them as novels. Maybe they're over 50,000 words, but they're really short. I don't think I took more than a day to read one of the Murderbot novellas. There is a longer book later in the series that we'll come to later. In fact, I'm talking way too long about just this one book, so let's keep going. Next up was Jade City by Fonda Lee. This book rules. I've recommended it to tons of friends. I rated it 4-star. I don't know whether I would go back and rate it 5 now, honestly, thinking about it again. I rated the other 2 books in the series 5 stars, I think. It has some incredible characters, some genuine surprises. So Fonda Lee was able to pull off a kind of big surprise quite early into the book, which is a big inciting incident for the rest of the series. Hilo is probably one of the great all-time flawed characters. There's just so much good in Jade City. I really, really love this book, and I love the series. The sequels, we'll come to those fairly shortly because I read them all in the first couple of months of the year, I think. After that, we are on Hunger of the Gods. Hunger of the Gods I gave a 4-star as well, although I will say I did think it was better than Shadow of the Gods. I think I'm basically the only person who thinks that, because I know that a lot of the ratings, the average rating is higher on Goodreads, but also that doesn't account for the fact that a lot of people might have read Shadow of the Gods, not loved it, and decided not to pick up the second one. Whereas if you're reading the second one, you already have that built-in interest and like of the first book. Hunger of the Gods is a really good sequel. It expands on the world, it expands on the magic, and it gives you the POV of a couple of characters who you could possibly label as villains or antagonists in the first book, and giving you those villain POVs is really, really useful and interesting, and I really like that. Next up, I read Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, which is the second book in her Farseer trilogy. Now, Royal Assassin I really liked. Robin Hobb has an absolutely glacial pace. I read Assassin's Apprentice the previous year, and I honestly wanted to go straight into Royal Assassin, but it took almost a month for the book to arrive from my library reservation. And that's not because someone else had it out. It was literally just, for some reason, the library system took like a month to arrive. I ended up buying the rest of the series because I was annoyed about waiting for the library so much. Anyway, so Royal Assassin was really good. There's not too much to say about this one, to be honest. I don't want to spoil, obviously, anything that happens in any of these books, so I'm not really going to be talking about any of the story elements for any of them. However, I really like this one. Robin Hobb's the master of character work. I rated this one a 5-star. This was my first 5-star of the year. Although, like I said, retroactively, I think I'd probably rate Jade City 5 stars. And I think that the reason I didn't rate Jade City 5 stars is purely because when I read Jade War, I was like, oh, this is better than Jade City, and this is a 5-star book, so that means Jade City is a 4-star. But I think they could all be 5-star books. Next up, after Royal Assassin, I read Dark One Forgotten by Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells. So this is the first of the billion Sanderson books I read this year. So Dark One is a comic book series that Brandon Sanderson wrote, and he has been working on turning it into a full novel at some point eventually in the future. And it's kind of like a isekai, like it's someone from our world who goes into a fantasy world, and like I think they become like the Dark Lord. Dark One Forgotten is an audiobook only audio drama that you can get it on Audible and a few other places, and basically it is the story of these two college students who are investigating something which kind of leads them down this fantastical like kind of urban fantasy magical journey. I think that so much of this story is really, really good, but I think that the main character's best friend is incredibly annoying. I feel like they were inserted to try and be funny, and they are just not funny at any point. They're quite annoying, and I ended up rating this book as actually a 3-star, and almost exclusively for that best friend character. Um, the voice acting is great. It's a full cast. Oh, we've got a cat waking up there. The voice acting is great. It's full cast. But don't know really why, but just that character grated on me so much that it kind of affected my enjoyment of the book. And I think that with a full cast audiobook, it's easier for those characters to stand out. So unfortunately, that character kind of negatively affected my experience. However, I'd still recommend you listening to it, especially if you're a fan of things like serial podcasts like that, like true crime style podcasts, because that's it's pretending to be a true crime podcast set in a world where there's kind of magical and fantastical things. It's really good. Is it really good? It's really good aside from that one character that I hated. Next up, Assassin's Quest. Assassin's Quest I rated as a 4-star. I did not enjoy this one as much as Royal Assassin. I'm going to read you from my review here. And I think that this review... So here we go. I start this book with... The review, sorry. This book is very, very, very long. You'll read 100 pages about Fitz walking up a road. But if it hits you right, you'll love it. And that's exactly how I would describe that book, if not wanting to go too deep into spoilers. There's so much good in this book, and I think that it's a fantastic ending for the Farseer trilogy. I think that the one section where I talk about walking up a road is too long. The section that you see afterwards is again too long. It's not so long that I regret reading it at all. I think it's still very, very good. But there is just so much time spent with these characters in this book, and I don't think all of it was 100% necessary. However, I did love the book. I did rate it 4 stars. I would highly recommend the Farseer trilogy. Next up, I read, or in fact, this one's another listen. So I read Never Finished, Unshackle Your Mind and Win the War Within by David Goggins. Now, you probably know who David Goggins is if you've spent any time on social media or Instagram or YouTube. He is an ultra-endurance athlete, a former soldier, and a very, very interesting guy who, in real life, I would probably really dislike and not have anything in common with. But also, as an ultra-distance athlete myself, I've run a couple of ultra-marathons, lots of marathons. I really like listening to books about people doing ultra distance running while I am doing training for my ultra distance runs. So that's why I read this one. If I had been using Goodreads last year, half of the books I read probably would have been about ultra marathons, because I ran my first ultra marathon in July 2022. So basically, this was the very last one to come out, the most recent one, and this was while I was still training for ultra distance. I've kind of stepped back on that one now because I don't really have the time. However, I do like these books, and I have re-listened to David Goggins' first book a couple of times, because when you're out training, pounding pavement for 20 hours a week, you need to re-listen to stuff, and that's why I re-listened to the first book. But also, it's quite inspiring in terms of how far he pushes himself. I feel like I have to add a lot of caveats to this book, but really, I enjoyed it, and I think that if you, like me, like listening to people doing things about ultra distance, then it's definitely one of the better audiobooks for that. Next up, this is a real killer. So this is Skin Game by Jim Butcher. Skin Game is book 15 in the Dresden Files. It is the return of my favourite set of antagonists in the Dresden Files. It's book 15, so I really can't talk about anything without spoiling stuff at this point. But essentially, the plot of this one is that Harry has to work together with one of the major villains of the series to perform a heist in hell. And it's great. It's so much fun. It is, if not the best book in the Dresden Files, very high up there. And if you are a Dresden fan, you know why it's good. I rated this a 5-star. I rate a lot of Dresden books 4 or 5-star, but this one is truly, if not the best, one of the top 3, one of the best Dresden Files books. Next up, I read Peace Talks by Jim Butcher. This is where I was finishing the Dresden Files. So Peace Talks I rated 4 stars. Peace Talks is a good book. It was originally with Battleground, which I read next, and I can tell you Battleground I gave 5 stars. Originally, Peace Talks and Battleground were one book. But the publisher said to Jim that it was too long for his Dresden Files series, and so he split it into and expanded both halves into full-size Dresden File books. I think they're both really good. I liked Battleground more than Peace Talks. Jim managed to massively surprise me with a couple of plot elements in Battleground. And the way that we have left Dresden at the end of Battleground is really strong. And I cannot wait for 12 Months, which is the next book in the series. Peace Talks, because Peace Talks was essentially the first half of a Dresden novel, we don't get as much of the kind of build up to conflict conclusion that you normally get in Dresden. So it just ended up being a slightly weaker entry. And it does feel like the first half of a book where Battleground is the second. I read them back to back, and when my friend Andre was reading the Dresden Files, I said, clear your schedule so that you can read these back to back, because they together are fantastic. Separately, I think both are kind of weaker than some of their parts, but because of the way that I read them back to back, I loved Battleground and gave it 5 stars. We're currently in February, by the way. We're halfway through February, so this video is going to be a long one. Next up, Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. If maybe this won't be a long one, because I can just tell you that I rated this one 3 stars. This is where I realised that they were all the same, and from here on out, all of my Murderbot stuff is 3-star, I think. Jade War by Fonda Lee, 5 stars, absolute banger. Expands on the world in a really, really smart way, gives you more time with Andon, who is one of the best characters in the series. Excellent book. If you have not read the Greenbone Saga, there's only 3 books, it's fully finished, it's done. Fonda Lee said she's not writing any more books in that universe. It's absolutely worth your time. Even though the books are big and chunky, I read Jade War in like a week and a half or whatever. Like, big books, easy reads. Next up, Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, 3 stars. All the Murderbot books are the same. Next up, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which was a 5-star. I think that, I talked earlier about how the Farseer trilogy is fantastic. I think Live Ship Traders Book 1, Ship of Magic, is better than all 3 books in the Farseer trilogy. Ship of Magic is excellent. Moving to multi-POV gives Robin Hobb a chance to really flex her character writing strengths. The world is incredible. The magic is interesting. Everything about Live Ship I loved. I went straight from Ship of Magic into Mad Ship, the second book in the series. But I had read so much Hobb in such a short period of time, and they're very long books, that I actually think I kind of did myself a disservice. And about 100, 200 pages into Mad Ship, I decided to put the book down and come back to it much, much later in the year. I was intending to try and finish it at the end of, by the end of December, but I think that's fully on hold now while I focus on reading some smaller series and then starting The Wheel of Time in January. So when will I get back to Mad Ship? Not sure. I will possibly restart the book at this point, but we'll see when we get to it. Next up, Fated by Benedict Jacker. I used this book as an example multiple times across this year about books that were good but that really didn't grab me. I rated this 3 stars, and I have to say that if I was rating it again now, it would maybe just scrape a 3. And I probably should have DNF'd this book. I was reading Fated because I wanted to kind of keep myself on the kind of Dresden Files urban fantasy train. Jim Butcher himself recommended this series as kind of, if you miss the Dresden Files between books, you can read the Alex Verus series. Alex Verus is finished. It's 10 books and it's done. The thing about Fated that I really didn't like is the chapters are so long. I complained about this with Curse of the Mistwraith, and they're just so long. Some of the chapters are would take 30 or 40 minutes to read, and this is not a long book. It's not dense either. It's very kind of easy reading, very accessible. But I found this book a real slog to get through. Not having the frequent chapter breaks and things like that. There would be scene shifts in the chapters, so you would have a chapter that would have 6 or 7 different scenes in it, and it makes no sense that is not 6 or 7 chapters. I really don't like when people do long chapters with multiple scenes. It doesn't make sense to me as a reader. It doesn't make sense to me as a writer, and I'm a very amateur writer. I have a university degree in it, but I've never published anything. I'm not a good writer. But to me, it makes absolutely no sense. You need to give people mental breaks. You need to give people stopping points. And it's half an hour to read a chapter is way too long. And some chapters were longer than that. And what happens with really long chapters is I get to the point where I finish it and then I'm like, oh, now I can put the book down, rather than going oh, I want to see what happens next because the chapters are so short. When the chapters are long, I just read one chapter and put the book down for the day. I don't pick it back up. So that's why Fated is probably now a 2-star, and I would say maybe my least favourite book of the year. But I'm not going to do a negative video for my book of the year content, so there's not going to be any disappointing or worst books or anything like that. Just because I don't feel there's enough negativity on the internet, I don't need to add to that. But if you are the kind of person who's going to watch 45 minutes of this video, then you can see that I did not enjoy Fated, and I think that I would give it a 2-star. And I did get the second book from the library with the intention to read it because people told me kind of that it got better, but then a lot of people were like, well, actually, Fated might be the best book in the series, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll step away from that one and come back to it if I feel a gap in the urban fantasy in my life. Next up, Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This book rules. It's awesome. It's really, really long, and I wish it was longer. I wish that this book had been 5 books. We cover a really long period of time. I want to say 30 years in this book, and the previous 2 books are a year in time each. We cover an extremely long period of time with massive time skips. I think Fonda Lee really, really nails this book. But I think she could have nailed a 10-book series with these characters, and I would have absolutely loved it. There's enough story there. So much happens between the pages, in the time skips, and honestly, go out and read the Greenbone Saga. It's so good. 5 stars. Network Effect by Martha Wells, 3 stars. All these books are very, very similar, and do not read them back to back. Do you know what? I think this is the last Murderbot that I read, and I want to say to you, if you like Murderbot, I'm not saying that you have bad taste at all. There are some books where if someone was like, "Oh, I love this book," I'd be like, "Okay, that means I don't have to trust your taste." Murderbot is well written. The characters are good. The world building is good. The samey nature of them is a selling point to many people. They probably don't realize it, but they probably look at Murderbot as kind of like this cozy thing that you can go back to. It's not terribly surprising, but for me, I'm just not really into that. Like people often say that the Dresden Files are very similar, and they often are kind of based on that film noir structure. But I think that every single one includes a new and interesting element, whereas the Murderbot books are very much kind of variations on a theme. Maybe that's unfair. That's just my point of view. Next up, I read a ton of self-published stuff. So I read Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. I've got a full review for this on the channel. So I finished reading this in June, and I did a review for this on the channel because I wanted to make sure that I had reviewed all of these books, and I wanted some content to go in Self-Pub September. And I really, really like this book. I don't want to go too deep into this series again, but if you like epic fantasy, you like characters, you like really great plotting and world building, I would massively recommend Ryan Cahill's Bound and the Broken series. And you're going to hear me say that like 3 or 4 more times. Next up, Unsouled by Will White. So this is a book that I was also unsold on. Sorry. So I was not sold on Cradle at all. A lot of people had said that Cradle was amazing, but then way more people that I watched on BookTube were saying that they didn't get it. And I decided on a whim when I had Kindle Unlimited for this period of time. So in like June, July, August, September, I had a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I've got it again now, actually, because I'm reading more self-pub stuff. But all of these, a lot of people were saying that the Cradle series just seemed to be all about like leveling up and getting stronger, and was not so much about character or plot. But book 1 massively surprised me. So I gave this a 4-star rating. I read this real quick. 2 days it took me to read, and I was reading a lot slower before I started BookTube. So really, really good book. As I was saying, there is a big twist in this book that I absolutely did not see coming and really, really enjoyed. If you have kind of a curiosity about a short, fun, fast-paced book with kind of like a martial artsy style, martial artsy, magic-y style sort of storytelling, then I definitely recommend it. I did actually start the second book, and I never finished it. I DNF'd it. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to go back and read it, but I found the start of the second book to really deflate my excitement from the end of the first, which is like the opposite of what I want from series. I kind of feel like you've got to amp it up at the start and then go back to normality, whereas this one went straight back in at the bottom and was starting to build back up, whereas that's not really how I want series to go on. Like if you read Sanderson's books, he often starts with a big epic action sequence or whatever. Anyway, next up we have 2 more books, and then we are into books I read for the channel. So last full novel that I read was Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Cahill. There's a review on the channel. This series is amazing. This is the book where the series becomes like one of my all-timers. Of Darkness and Light is way better than I was expecting. Like I thought, I really liked Of Blood and Fire, and I think that maybe if I had read a lot more fantasy, Of Blood and Fire would have felt a lot more samey to me. Like a lot of reviewers have said, oh, this book is good, but it draws heavily from other fantasy. but all the fantasy that they reference when they say that it draws heavily from that stuff is stuff I haven't read. Whereas Of Darkness and Light is where people are like, oh yeah, this is where it's amazing. And for me, like, I loved Of Blood and Fire, and this is so much better than Of Blood and Fire that, like, this instantly was like 5-star, one of my favourite books of the year. Next up was The Exile, which is the final book I read before I started the channel. Now, The Exile is by Ryan Carhill. It is the second novella in the Bound and the Broken, and I realise now that I didn't note that I had read The Fall. No, I never put that on my Goodreads. I did also read The Fall. I got a physical copy of The Fall from Amazon because I had a physical copy of Blood and Fire, and I think that I will eventually slowly build the whole series so that I've got a shelf to show off. Maybe one day I'll get some shelves or something instead of just a cat. I say just a cat. You're a good lad. Anyway, The Exile is great. It is... I mean, there's a review on the channel. It's the backstory of Dane, one of the new kind of killer characters introduced in Of Darkness and Light, which takes Of Darkness and Light from being kind of this interesting, simple story about Kalen and his kind of pilgrimage to being this huge world-spanning war. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I rated it 4-star, which is what I think... Is 4-star the best rating I've given to a novella? Possibly. Or no, because I rate The Ice as 5-star, I think, when it eventually comes out. Where did I rate The Ice? Where is it? Oh, is The Ice not even here? Have I lost The Ice? I can't find The Ice in my Goodreads either. I'll have to double check that. I'll make sure that both of them have been rated. But I'm pretty certain I gave The Ice 5 stars. That was excellent. The novellas for The Bound and the Broken are not essential in the way that you will miss loads of stuff, but I think they're essential in that they're really good and they are worth your time and they're real quick. You can read them in a day. I read The Ice. I got up, went to the gym, came home, started reading The Ice, finished it, posted the review. I could read it that quickly. So yeah, really recommended. And that's it. That's all the books I read before I started the channel. So, like I said, the Ryan Carhill books, they did get reviews on the channel. So if you want to watch the full reviews for those, they are there. And that takes you all the way up to August. I don't actually know how many books that is. I'm going to count it and put it in the thumbnail. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video and that this has helped you understand my feelings on the books that I've read this year, so that when the Book of the Year content comes out next week, you'll know what you're in for, which is a wild ride of me talking about how much I love all these books. If you have liked this video, please do give it a like. If you have read any of these books and you want to talk to me about them, then I would love to chat to you. One of the biggest reasons I started this channel is because no one will talk to me about books, because I will go on forever. So drop a comment down below and we can have a conversation down there. If you would like to see my Book of the Year content, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the channel. You can click the notification bell if you want, but I understand if you don't want to. I hate getting notifications, although I do have it on for my favourite channels. So, you know, be like me. Anyway, I'll speak to you tomorrow.